Number 15. Jamal English and Shaanya Boyd. In a disturbing case of mistaken identity that was captured on camera, police in Kenosha, Wisconsin, interrupted a family that was out to dinner at a local Applebee's restaurant and arrested a couple who were falsely accused of being involved in a hit-and-run accident. Jamal English was holding his baby when officers tackled him. They took the child away and proceeded to pin Jamal to the floor, while one cop repeatedly punched him in the face. And at some point during the arrest, another officer pepper-sprayed Jamal's girlfriend, Shaanya Boyd. According to police, witnesses described the hit-and-run suspects as two black men and a woman who were carrying a child as they ran toward Applebee's. Officials claimed that employees directed the responding officers to Jamal and Shaanya, and that the cops later discovered that the real suspects were hiding in the restaurant's bathroom. Even after the identity confusion was cleared up, Jamal and Shaanya were still charged with disorderly conduct, marijuana possession, and resisting an officer. After footage of the arrest went viral, rapper Jay-Z hired prestigious attorney Alex Spiro to represent Jamal. A spokesperson for the musician's social justice organization, Team Rock, told ABC News that Jamal should have never been charged in the first place and described his arrest as a case of racial profiling. 2 officers were suspended for their handling of the incident and are required to undergo additional training, but police officials seem reluctant to directly admit that the cops were in the wrong. The charges against Jamal and Shaanya were dropped, and the couple is now considering a lawsuit against the city of Kenosha for the mistreatment they endured. Jamal and Shaanya's new attorney, Kevin O'Connor, said that he planned to send a letter to Kenosha Mayor John Antaramian to discuss much-needed changes in police policy. He told the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel that if his attempt to reach out goes unanswered, the couple plans to move forward with a federal lawsuit for violating their constitutional rights. O'Connor criticized Police Chief Patrick Patton for narrating an 11-minute video of bodycam footage from the arrest in a way that clearly indicates that he doesn't think the officers did anything wrong. The attorney said that Patton needs to stop playing lawyer and expressed a deep concern that unless changes are made within the department, situations like this will continue to occur, and that one of these confrontations could lead to the police needlessly killing someone. Number 14. Yenia Garcia. At the end of a night out in Scottsdale, Arizona in May of 2020, Yenia Garcia and her friend went to her car to drive home and discovered that someone had smashed a windshield. It looked like someone had stomped on the glass, and Garcia wanted to report the incident to the police. So she flagged down some police officers who were patrolling on bicycles. But instead of getting an opportunity to complain about the vandalism to her car, she was treated like a criminal. At the time, law enforcement was also dealing with a hit-and-run of a pedestrian that had occurred nearby. And believing Garcia was responsible for the crash, Officer Nicholas Fay promptly arrested her without allowing her to explain the situation at hand. The police could be heard repeatedly calling Garcia a liar in bodycam footage of the arrest. When she responded to the hit-and-run allegation with a confused expression, one of the cops told her not to make faces like she didn't understand what was going on. The officer told Garcia that he could tell she left the accident because she'd been drinking and was worried about getting caught. This wasn't the case, but there was no convincing the police that they were wrong about their assessment of the situation. Garcia's friend was also accused of lying and could barely get a word in as an officer spoke over him with repeated allegations about his and Garcia's involvement in the hit and run. The officer refused to let the friend show him a record of transactions, proving that the pair were elsewhere at the time of the hit and run. He even went as far as telling the friend that he already knew for a fact that Garcia was driving the car that had struck a young man several blocks away. The officer claimed that the young woman had shards of glass on her shirt, which she later denied in news interviews. In the arrest report, an officer claimed that surveillance footage of the parking lot where Garcia had parked was inconclusive when it came to determining whether she'd left and come back at any point throughout the night. But the video did, in fact, prove that Garcia's car had remained in the parking lot at the time of the hit and run. Security footage also showed a man jumping on top of her car and stomping on her windshield, further proving that the police had arrested a completely innocent person. The criminal case against Garcia was dropped, but by then, a lot of irreversible damage had been done. In addition to being forced to strip naked and having blood forcibly drawn without being allowed to see the warrant first, her mugshot was plastered all over the internet. So in retaliation, she filed a lawsuit which was settled in 2023 when the city of Scottsdale agreed to pay her $200,000. The Scottsdale police said that several officers were disciplined, with the most serious punishment being a 40-hour unpaid suspension. But the department didn't name the officers who were reprimanded, and nobody lost their job as a result. Number 13. Desnica Patrick. After pulling out of her driveway in Collinsville, Illinois one morning in March 2021, Desnica Patrick and her brother noticed that a growing number of cop cars were trailing their vehicle with their lights on. They pulled over and cooperated with the officers, who confronted them with their guns drawn. Knowing that she hadn't committed any crimes, Desnica tried telling the arresting officers that they had the wrong person. She and her brother were nevertheless handcuffed and put in police cruisers. Desnica later told local station KSDK that she was terrified to the point of shaking and crying, especially being a black woman in America and knowing that a case of mistaken identity by law enforcement could cost her her life. A few minutes later, police realized they'd arrested the wrong individuals based on a tip from an informant who mistakenly identified Desnica's vehicle in connection with a wanted armed robbery suspect. The officers released Desnica and her brother and apologized for the misunderstanding, but the incident left the young woman deeply traumatized to the point of feeling fearful if she saw a police car out on the road, which is understandable given what she'd been through. Number 12. Austin Coulson. 19-year-old Austin Coulson was driving outside Houston after a long day of attending college classes and working at his pizza delivery job when he noticed flashing lights in his rearview mirror. The traffic stop, which occurred in October 2021, marked his first time ever getting pulled over by the police. He later told KVUE that he recalled feeling nervous as he pulled into a business parking lot less than a mile from his home, but he assumed he'd receive a traffic ticket and would soon be on his way. Coulson was both shocked and confused when two officers approached his vehicle and immediately ordered him to get out while telling him he was wanted on a warrant for assault with bodily injury, a charge that can carry a jail sentence of up to a year. He was even more perplexed when he learned that the warrant was issued out of San Marcos, a city he'd never been to, in a county hundreds of miles away. After spending 16 hours in jail, Coulson was released without having received much of an explanation of how and why he'd been accused of a crime he didn't commit. He later told local station KVUE's investigative journalism team that the San Marcos police were unwilling to offer many details when he called them to try getting to the bottom of the situation. After weeks of trying to get answers, Coulson finally learned how he'd been falsely identified as an accomplice to a group assault in San Marcos in June of 2021. The victim identified a man from Coulson's hometown as one of the suspects, and the person was arrested. But while scrolling through the suspect's social media, the victim saw Coulson in an old photo with the suspect and mistakenly identified him as also being involved in the crime. In addition to having never stepped foot in San Marcos, Coulson hadn't seen the suspect in years. Investigators had supposedly received information that the teen was a student at a nearby university, which later proved to be untrue, and this information was used to obtain a warrant for his arrest. In 2023, Coulson filed a civil lawsuit accusing San Marcos police of wrongfully arresting him for a crime based almost entirely on a Facebook photo. The police department is fighting the lawsuit, while Coulson remains hopeful that the officers and supervisors involved in the botched investigation are properly held accountable. Number 11. Porsche Woodruff. 32-year-old Porsche Woodruff was 8 months pregnant and getting her two other children ready for school at their home in Detroit one morning when 6 police officers showed up at her door and arrested her for robbery and kidnapping. She was shocked that the officers thought she was even capable of carrying out a violent crime so far along in her pregnancy, but was nevertheless handcuffed and put into the back of a cop car. Police seized her phone into evidence, interrogated her, and booked her into jail, where she suffered from anxiety attacks and contractions. After spending 11 hours in custody, Porsche bonded out and went to the hospital, where she was treated for dehydration. Eventually, though, investigators realized that they'd apprehended the wrong person, and the case against Porsche was dropped about a month after her arrest. Her experience marked at least the 6th case of a person being falsely accused of a crime after being identified as a suspect using facial recognition technology. According to the New York Times, all 6 falsely accused individuals are black, and Porsche is the first woman to come forward after having it happen to her. Detroit Police Chief James White declined to comment to the Times, citing the need for additional investigation, but he said the allegations were being taken seriously. In a statement, Wayne County Prosecutor Kim Worthy described the arrest warrant against Porsche to be appropriate based upon the facts. Porsche is now suing the city of Detroit in federal court for wrongful arrest, marking the third civil case against the city by a person claiming to be misidentified based on facial recognition technology. The growing number of cases of this nature indicate an over-reliance on facial recognition as a method of solving crimes when it should be regarded as no more than an investigative tool to help generate leads. Number 10. Tony Nguan. Florida resident Tony Nguan was shopping at Walmart in Spring Hill in 2023 when he was approached by a Hernando County deputy and was arrested for trespassing. In a police report, the deputy wrote that authorities had received a call from an asset protection employee at the store who said that the shopper had been banned and given a warning not to return 5 years earlier in 2018. Nguan didn't understand why he was being arrested. After arriving at the jail, he handed over his ID, and the deputy soon realized that he had the wrong person in custody, forcing him to release Nguan. As it turned out, Nguan had been issued a trespass warning a decade earlier in 2013, but the employee who made the 911 call had mistakenly identified Nguan as another accused trespasser named Cody Vonderlinde. In a recording of the conversation with the dispatcher, the worker could be heard saying that Vonderlinde had trespassed at the store in the past and that he was known for being violent and carrying weapons. Nguan filed a $10 million federal lawsuit accusing Walmart, the employee who called 911, and the arresting deputy of racial profiling and false arrest. During an interview with ABC Action News, his attorney said that Nguan and Vonderlinde look nothing alike. The lawyer criticized the deputy's failure to identify Nguan before taking him into custody and described the incident as reflective of the all Asians look alike mentality that many people are known to have. Nguan provided the media with a video clip that appeared to show the deputy admitting to and apologizing for the identity mix-up. Despite this, though, the Hernando County Sheriff's Office defended the arrest, arguing that the trespassing ban against Nguan was valid at the time of his arrest, thereby establishing probable cause. But for now, the lawsuit appears to be ongoing. Number 9. Sarah Sacia Berry. In early 2020, Sarah Sacia Berry and her husband took a honeymoon cruise from Louisiana to Cozumel, Mexico. They had a fantastic time, but the fun ended when their ship docked in New Orleans at the end of the trip. The newlyweds hadn't even gotten off the boat when authorities knocked on their stateroom door and demanded to speak with Sarah. Then, after handing over her driver's license at their request, she was arrested for failing to return a rental car 3 years earlier in 2017. Sarah wasn't guilty of the crime. She was just unlucky enough to have the same name as the woman who was wanted for the alleged vehicle theft. She was arrested and hauled off to jail, where she was held overnight before being taken to a different jail the next morning. However, law enforcement finally realized they had the wrong Sarah Sacia. The traumatized traveler was finally released from custody at 4 p.m. on the day after her arrest. As it turned out, a now-retired detective had mistakenly filed a warrant for the innocent Sarah Sacia, whose birth date is different from the woman who was accused of failing to return her rental car. East Baton Rouge Sheriff Sid Goutreau apologized for the mistake and reassured the public that he was committed to making the improvements and changes necessary to prevent a situation like this from happening again. Number 8. Christina Foror. Christina Foror was about to go pick up her daughter at school one afternoon in 2007 when 3 cop cars rushed up into the front yard of her Sterling, Colorado home. Until then, her legal record only consisted of a few traffic tickets and no arrests. The police told her that she was being arrested on an outstanding warrant for aggravated robbery. And unwilling to listen to the distraught woman's claims of innocence, they put her in handcuffs and took her to jail. As her husband scrambled to collect bail money, Christina continued pleading her innocence at every opportunity. She posted bail after spending 5 days in jail, but was still facing charges for a crime she didn't commit, and she had a hard time getting authorities to cough up details on what she was being accused of and why. The case was finally dropped, though, after prosecutors realized Christina was telling the truth about the mistaken identity. She had a similar name to the woman listed in the warrant, Christina Foror. The women had little else in common. Christina Foror is white, several years older, and significantly heavier than Christine Foror, who was described in a New York Times article as a petite Native American woman. Christina filed a lawsuit accusing police of violating her constitutional rights, including her Fourth Amendment protection against arrest without probable cause. A settlement was eventually reached, but this was unfortunately just one of hundreds of cases of mistaken identity arrests in recent years, according to the American Civil Liberties Union, which has successfully sued the city of Denver on behalf of at least 5 plaintiffs. Number 7. Randall Reed. While driving to his mother's house outside of Atlanta in November 2023, 28-year-old Randall Reed was pulled over by an officer who told him that he had 2 outstanding theft warrants out of Louisiana. Reed had never even been to Louisiana, but his claims of innocence fell on deaf ears as he was booked into the DeKalb County Jail. He remained there for 6 days without even knowing what he was being accused of. Reed and his parents spent copious amounts of time and money in their efforts to get to the bottom of the situation. They eventually learned that he'd been mistakenly identified as the suspect in a case of stolen credit cards being used to buy $13,000 worth of designer purses from a consignment shop outside of New Orleans. Determined to resolve the situation and prove their son's innocence, the Reeds hired criminal defense attorney Thomas Calogero, who traveled to the store where the purses were purchased in order to view the surveillance footage. The thief in the security video was noticeably heavier than Reed, and there were enough other differences for Calogero to feel confident that his client wasn't the man in the footage. Calogero told the Times-Picayune that a sheriff's deputy had described Reed as a positive match to the suspect, leading him to suspect that investigators had used facial recognition technology. A source with insider knowledge confirmed the attorney's suspicion to the New York Times, yet none of the legal documents about the case mention the technology's use. In the end, Reed was released and the case against him was dropped. His experience reflects a disturbing trend involving the wrongful arrests of black men who were identified as criminal suspects using facial recognition technology. In Reed's case, his family was able to pay the thousands of dollars that it cost them to resolve the mix-up. But they shouldn't have been required to go to such lengths to prove their son's innocence, and many falsely arrested individuals can't afford to fight to clear their name. At a time when facial recognition technology is increasingly used to identify criminal suspects, cases like these raise disturbing concerns over whether investigators are placing too much trust in these programs. These cases also beg the question of whether racial bias plays a role in the failure of investigators to take basic investigative steps that could have easily ruled out a wrongfully accused suspect. Number 6. Maria Valentine. Seminole County, Florida resident Maria Valentine was caught off guard when deputies knocked on her front door during the pre-dawn hours one morning in August of 2022. They initially told the 47-year-old that they wanted to check up on some recent car break-ins at her apartment complex, but they were actually there to serve an arrest warrant. With no idea what she could possibly be wanted by the law for, Maria questioned why she was being arrested. In video footage of the incident, she could be heard challenging deputies outside her home. She was handcuffed and placed in the back of a police cruiser where she could see the arrest warrant on a laptop screen in the front seat, and Maria immediately noticed that the woman in the photo looked much different from her. The wanted suspect also had a different address and birth date, but it took nearly 2 hours for deputies to realize that they'd arrested the wrong person. Finally, though, at 6 a.m., they released Maria and apologized for the misunderstanding. But without any knowledge of whether the correct person had been arrested moving forward, it left her feeling uneasy. In early 2023, Maria told local station WFTV that she now gets anxiety when she sees a police vehicle, and that it even made her anxious just to talk about the experience. She said that she'd never had any previous encounters like the one involving the mistaken identity, and expressed her belief that people should feel safe when talking to a person of authority. It's not much to ask, yet mistreatment by police continues to be a rampant problem in America, even as more attention is finally being drawn to the issue. Number 5. Thomas Nolan. A British couple's Canadian vacation took a nightmarish turn in August 2023 when 19-year-old Thomas Nolan was arrested in Toronto for attempted murder. He was accused of trying to kill a man over a month earlier, yet his wife, Delaney, claimed that they'd only been in the country for 3 days when the arrest took place. The incident in question occurred in late June when a man in a pickup truck drove onto the sidewalk and struck a pedestrian, following a physical fight between the two. After Thomas's arrest, Delaney took to social media with her claims about how her husband couldn't have possibly been the culprit. She wrote that Thomas had been granted bail for a large sum of money and extremely strict conditions, but that authorities refused to release him, calling him a threat to the public due to the nature of the charges against him. Delaney further speculated that Thomas was being mistreated because he's a member of Britain's Irish traveller community, which has a troubling history of being discriminated against. Meanwhile, authorities remained tight-lipped on the matter and declined media requests for comment. Unfortunately, there have been no updates since shortly after Nolan's arrest, leaving the current status of the situation unclear. Number 4. Julie Hudson. When 31-year-old Philadelphia resident and PhD student Julie Hudson was repeatedly turned down for jobs in early 2023, she looked into the matter and was shocked to learn that there was a warrant out for her arrest. Knowing that she hadn't committed any crimes, she visited her local police station to clear her name. But instead of receiving an explanation, she was arrested and taken to jail. Hudson had been identified as the suspect in a shoplifting incident at a sporting goods store in Webster, Texas that occurred in May of 2022. According to NBC Philadelphia, another suspect in the case had identified their sister, Julie Hudson, as an accomplice. She was referring to a different Julie Hudson, but investigators misidentified the Philadelphia woman, who's never even been to Texas, as their suspect, based on their comparison of a surveillance image of the thief and a social media photo of Hudson. As the wrongfully arrested woman languished in jail for the next 6 days, her family got to work in their efforts to clear her name. They proved that Julie was at work in Pennsylvania when the shoplifting crime took place, and after realizing the mistake, authorities in Webster canceled the warrant and told prison officials to release Hudson as soon as possible. Accompanied by her attorney, Shaker Johnson, Julie told Fox 29's Good Day Philadelphia that people kept describing experiences like hers as a common mistake. She described the conditions in jail as way worse than how they're portrayed in TV dramas like Orange is the New Black, and said that she doesn't want an apology for the mistake, but for these types of mix-ups to stop happening. Number 3. David Sosa. In 2014, a jet engineer named David Sosa was pulled over in Martin County, Florida, and he was arrested on an outstanding warrant out of Texas for selling crack cocaine back in 1992. With no tattoos, a different height and weight, and a different birth date and social security number than the subject of the warrant, Sosa didn't even remotely match the suspect's description, but he was taken into custody anyway. He was released from custody a few hours later after his fingerprints proved not to be a match to the man who was wanted by the law. 4 years later in 2018, Sosa was pulled over again and was arrested on the same warrant. He tried explaining to police that he wasn't David Sosa who was wanted by the law and that this mistake had happened before, but he was nevertheless thrown in jail. Sosa spent 3 days in custody before anyone tried to confirm his identity by taking his fingerprints. But after finally realizing that he had been telling the truth about the case of mistaken identity, authorities released him. Following the mix-up, Sosa filed a lawsuit accusing law enforcement of violating his constitutional rights. The case challenges a decades-old ruling that a man's rights weren't violated when he was held for 3 days in a case of mistaken identity. In the previous case, Baker versus McCollum, the man's brother had obtained a driver's license using his information. The brother was arrested on drug charges in the late 1970s and was booked into custody under the information on his license. He skipped out on bond and a warrant was issued, leading to the mistaken arrest of the brother, whose identity he'd used. The wrongfully arrested man sued and lost the case. In 2023, the U.S. Court of Appeals similarly ruled that David Sosa's rights weren't violated. He escalated the case to the Supreme Court and asked for the decision to be overturned. 4 other David Sosas living in the U.S. supported the plaintiff in a filing known as a Friend of the Court brief. The document argues that the men are closer in age to the wanted David Sosa than the Florida man who was falsely arrested twice, and that they match the description of the wanted suspect more closely. This puts them at a heightened risk of being detained in the states of Florida, Georgia, and Alabama, where the warrant appears in warrant checks. Unfortunately, though, the Supreme Court denied the request to overturn the previous ruling in the case. In an article for The Hill expressing their disappointment in the decision, two of the David Sosas who signed the petition pointed out that with the resources available to help police identify a suspected criminal, nobody should be arrested and detained just because they have the same name as a wanted individual. The authors called for accountability in cases where the wrong person is taken into custody due to law enforcement's refusal to confirm the individual's identity using the tools that are at their fingertips. Number 2. Christy Jackson. When sheriff's deputies and K-9 units approached the Jacksonville, Florida home of Christy Jackson in search of a shooting suspect in April 2023, they were prepared for the suspect to possibly try to flee. But Jackson seemed more confused than anything, probably because the officers were at the wrong address. She clarified that she wasn't the person they were looking for and tried to close her front door, prompting the team to force their way in. Cell phone footage showed multiple officers tackling Jackson to the floor while other household members repeatedly asked the cops what was going on. Jackson later described how a deputy pinned her against a wall and how several of them put their weight on her body while subduing her, with one cop allegedly pushing his knee into her neck. She was then handcuffed and placed in the back of a police cruiser, where she continued to tell the police that she was not the shooting suspect. A family member retrieved Jackson's ID from inside the apartment, and witnesses verbally confirmed her identity. Satisfied that she was telling the truth, the deputies released her. In the aftermath of the disturbing incident, Jackson contacted the News 4 Jax investigative journalism team and shared her suspicion that her civil rights were violated. The station's reporters spoke with crime and safety expert Lakeisha Burton, who explained the circumstances under which police are allowed to enter someone's home without a warrant. Burton said that Jackson didn't meet the criteria to justify an unwarranted entry and therefore had the right to deny law enforcement entry into her home. In a police report, an officer described Jackson as extremely confrontational during the interaction at her front door. She was also accused of refusing to identify herself, and the mistaken identity was partially explained away by saying that Jackson had the same hair color as the shooting suspect. Jackson denied the allegations that she was uncooperative and expressed a sincere doubt that the agency was working to improve its policing relationship with the community. As of May 2023, Jackson had retained a lawyer and was exploring her potential legal options, but it's unclear whether she decided to move forward with a lawsuit. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. Number 1. Kye Perryman. While leaving the Mall of America during Labor Day weekend in 2021, a group of girls were robbed at gunpoint by a pair of thieves who approached them in the parking lot and demanded their newly purchased merchandise and wallets. The suspects proceeded to a nearby Walmart store, where surveillance cameras captured footage of them using the victims' stolen credit cards. An investigative team from the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, known as the Criminal Information and Analysis Unit, stepped in to help solve the crime. According to Fox 29, the team assists smaller agencies with developing leads by looking at crime patterns and trends. Based on surveillance footage and a booking photo from a previous unrelated case, the investigators identified one of the suspects as 19-year-old Kye Perryman. He was arrested during a traffic stop and charged with felony aggravated robbery. Perryman adamantly denied being involved in the crime as he sat in jail for the next 5 days, trying to convince the authorities of his innocence. In his efforts to clear his wrongly accused client's name, the young man's defense attorney learned that the robbery suspects were driving a car that had been reported stolen the day before, at a time when Perryman could prove he was at his job. Cell phone data further revealed that Perryman was nowhere near the crime scene at the time of the robbery, and he had 2 arm tattoos that the suspect in the surveillance footage didn't have. Law enforcement already had a record of Perryman's tattoos, but they apparently failed to notice this major discrepancy. The case against Perryman was dropped and other suspects were eventually arrested, but the ordeal left him traumatized. He told local station Fox 9 that he believed he was misidentified based on his race, speculating that the detectives thought he looked like one of the suspects just because they were both black men with long hair. Perryman said that he felt like he had to work harder to prove his innocence than law enforcement had to work to prove he was a suspect. And in a country where every defendant is supposed to be considered innocent until proven guilty, simply believing that someone resembles a suspect hardly seems like a good enough reason to prosecute them for a crime, especially in the absence of any other evidence to support the case.
Number 9. Matthew McConaughey. While living in Austin, Texas in 1999, famous actor Matthew McConaughey partied all night long one Saturday to celebrate the Texas Longhorns' victory in a football game. The festivities in his alma mater's honor continued into the next day and throughout the night. McConaughey, who was 29 years old at the time, didn't get any sleep, but he eventually decided to go home and unwind. In his memoir titled Green Lights, he described how he arrived at his apartment at around 2:30 in the morning and got undressed, opened a window to let some fresh air in, and in his words, smoked a bowl. Feeling inspired by the music of Cameroonian guitar player and singer Henri de Conge that was playing on a stereo, McConaughey busted out his conga drums and started playing along. Suddenly, 2 police officers entered the apartment unannounced and pinned the actor to the floor. McConaughey later wrote that they were mocking him and aggressive towards him from the get-go. They seemed to feel triumphant about arresting the dazed and confused star, who was still in the early years of his career. The officers charged McConaughey with disturbing the peace, possession of marijuana, and resisting arrest, and hauled him off to jail, naked. One of the cops offered to grab a blanket, but he said that his nudity was proof that he was minding his own business that night when they barged into his home. However, he finally put pants on at the urging of a fellow inmate. At the arraignment, the judge was baffled by how a noise complaint had turned into such a heated confrontation. She dropped 2 of the 3 charges and reduced the third to a $50 noise citation, which was eventually wiped from McConaughey's record. Number 8. Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves was on the fast track to becoming an A-list celebrity when the Los Angeles police arrested him for drunk driving and several other charges in 1993. His mugshot reminded him of his dad, Sam Reeves, who was serving a decade behind bars at the time for cocaine possession. It was a much-needed reality check for the 30-year-old Keanu, who realized that he needed to change his lifestyle if he didn't want to end up like his father. As his fame grew, he had found himself struggling to cope with the immense changes that it brought to his life. He started drinking, partying, and driving recklessly. The DUI charge came after he was nabbed 3 times for driving with a suspended license in 1991 and 1992. At the time of the arrest in 1993, Reeves was slated to star in the movie Speed. It would be the film that shot him to stardom, but it may not have happened if he didn't change his ways. Keanu cleaned up his act and started to care a lot more about his health and future. Realizing that he was lucky that his drunk driving never hurt anyone, he also began to care more about the well-being and safety of others. He pleaded guilty to the reckless driving charge in exchange for getting his other charges dropped and put the ordeal behind him. Today, he continues to focus a lot of energy on his health and fitness, limits his drinking, and never drives drunk. Number 7. Winona Ryder. Actress Winona Ryder could have easily paid the $5,500 worth of designer merchandise she was caught stealing from a Saks Fifth Avenue store in Beverly Hills in 2001. While arresting her, police found 8 drugs in her possession, and Ryder was charged with 4 felonies as a result. The case fell under widespread public scrutiny, with many questioning the status of her mental health. Others assumed that there must have been a mistake, and that the police had arrested the wrong suspect. Either way, the allegations seemed wildly out of character for the actor. During the trial, Ryder was accused of abusing narcotics without a prescription. Prosecutor Ann Rundle told the jury that when the actress was arrested, she had more drugs on her than a terminally ill person would receive. Ryder took a break from Hollywood while she focused on the issues in her life that led to her to commit the crime. She later told Us magazine that a lot of people tried telling her what she should be doing, and that Hollywood would forget about her if she was gone for too long. However, she learned to tune out the noise and began to focus on what she believed was truly best for herself. In late 2002, Ryder was convicted of felony grand theft, shoplifting, and vandalism. The judge overseeing the case sentenced her to 3 years of probation and 480 hours of community service. She was ordered to undergo drug and psychological counseling and was required to pay over $10,000 in restitution and fines. When she completed her community service, the felony convictions were reduced to misdemeanors. She has since returned to acting, and while it took some time for her to shed her image as a 90s girl, her career seems to have made a full recovery. Number 6. Major League Mishap. In early 2021, former New York Yankees outfielder Johnny Damon was pulled over outside a gated community near Orlando on suspicion of drink driving. According to a police report, the 47-year-old was unsteady on his feet, and his speech was extremely slurred. Body cam footage showed Damon and his wife, Michelle Mangan Damon, both uttering "Blue Lives Matter," before Johnny said, "Guys, we are all for cops," as if it might get him off the hook. Damon also told the officers that he lived just 200 yards away. Michelle allegedly acted uncooperatively, refusing to get into a police car and telling an officer not to effing touch her when he tried pulling her toward the vehicle. Johnny didn't help matters by saying, "She fights all the time," and "My wife's crazy," in response to her behavior. As if the couple hadn't embarrassed themselves enough by that point, the former Major League Baseball player then accused the police of targeting him because he's a Trump supporter. An officer reassured Damon that the reasons for pulling him over had nothing to do with his political beliefs and everything to do with how he was driving. But he continued to insist otherwise. He performed poorly in field sobriety tests, and his blood alcohol level tested at 0.30, nearly 4 times the legal limit for driving in Florida. Johnny was taken into custody for the DUI, and Michelle was charged with battery on an officer and resisting with violence. He ultimately struck a deal with the prosecutors and entered a pretrial diversion program that would allow the case to be dropped if he stayed out of trouble for a certain amount of time. In addition to being required to leave, Johnny was ordered to perform community service and make a charitable donation. Number 5. John Mayer. When officers from the Los Angeles Police Department arrested Fall Out Boy singer Patrick Stump in 2009 for driving with a suspended license, singer John Mayer took to Twitter about his own arrest for the same offense 8 years earlier. In reference to the charge, he wrote, "It's the lamest answer to the question, why you in here?" Mayer then challenged TMZ's Harvey Levin to find his mugshot from the arrest, and the reward was a donation of $25,000 to his charity of choice. Levin responded by saying that the mugshot was on its way, but thesmokinggun.com found and posted it first. The photo was taken following Mayer's 2001 arrest in Georgia and was provided to both The Smoking Gun and TMZ by the Atlanta Department of Corrections. Shortly after, The Smoking Gun posted the image with a timestamp from 3:03 p.m. TMZ posted the same mugshot with the same timestamp. However, the first comment on the TMZ article came at 3:10, suggesting that the site backdated their post, and the corrections employee emailed the photo to TMZ after it appeared on The Smoking Gun. This proved that TMZ was not the first to post the mugshot. Mayer split the award between the two websites and donated $12,500 each to 2 different animal rescue organizations of their choosing. Number 4. Michelle Rodriguez. Actress Michelle Rodriguez is best known for her roles in The Fast and the Furious and the ABC Castaway drama Lost. She played an LAPD cop on TV, but in 2003, real-life LAPD officers arrested her for a hit-and-run, drunk driving, and driving with a suspended license. Rodriguez was still serving her 3-year probation sentence for the incident when she relocated to Hawaii to film Lost, and was repeatedly pulled over for speeding. Police cited her in 3 separate incidents for going at least 30 miles per hour over the intended speed limits. In late 2005, Rodriguez and her Lost co-star Cynthia Watros were arrested by Honolulu police within 15 minutes of each other for driving under the influence. Watros took full responsibility for her behavior and seemed eager to move on from her case. However, things were a little more complicated for Rodriguez, who was also prosecuted in Los Angeles for violating her probation by driving drunk. Rodriguez pleaded guilty to the DUI in Hawaii and received a 5-day jail sentence along with a fine. After serving her time there, she received a 60-day jail sentence in Los Angeles, but was released on her first day due to overcrowding. In 2007, she wound up back in jail for 6 months after failing to complete her community service requirements and drinking while on a monitoring device. This time, the actress was required to serve her entire sentence. She finally completed her community service in 2009, and despite all of her legal issues, she has seen continued success in her acting career. Number 3. Haley Joel Osment. Most people who have heard of Haley Joel Osment remember him as the child actor who starred in Forrest Gump and The Sixth Sense during the 1990s. He became especially famous for the trademark line, "I see dead people," that was featured in previews of The Sixth Sense. Osment grew up just like any other human, but people had a hard time thinking of him as anything other than the timid and terrified little boy from the supernatural horror film, which could explain why it came as such a shock when he was arrested for drunk driving in 2006. He was 18 years old when he lost control of his car and crashed in the middle of the night outside Los Angeles. After striking a mailbox and flipping the vehicle over, he was lucky to walk away with only a broken rib and an injured shoulder. His blood alcohol levels tested at 0.16, twice the legal limit, and police found marijuana in his car. Osment was convicted of misdemeanor DUI and drug possession and was sentenced to 3 years of probation. The judge also ordered him to attend rehab and AA meetings. Number 2. Manny Ramirez. Throughout his 19-season career, Manny Ramirez played as an outfielder for 5 Major League Baseball teams, including the Cleveland Indians, the Boston Red Sox, the Los Angeles Dodgers, the Chicago White Sox, and the Tampa Bay Rays. One of his biggest achievements came in 2004, when he was named MVP of the World Series for helping Boston achieve its first victory in 86 years. In 2011, he tested positive for a substance that is typically used to mask steroid use, which was his second violation of the MLB's drug policy. Facing a probable 100-game suspension, the 39-year-old decided to retire instead. Unfortunately, his life only seemed to get more messy after that. Just a handful of months after Manny retired, in response to a domestic violence call, Broward County Sheriff's deputies went to the Western Florida home he shared with his wife, Juliana. Juliana told the responding deputy that she had called the police during an argument with her husband because she was scared that things would escalate. She accused Ramirez of hitting her and had some visible injuries to her face. Manny denied it, claiming that Juliana had accidentally hit her head when he grabbed her by the shoulders. He was arrested for domestic violence, but the charge was dropped the following year when Juliana failed to cooperate with prosecutors. Authorities said that they had attempted to serve a subpoena on her and gotten a response, and that they believed she was out of state. Number 1. Randy Travis. Singer Randy Travis recorded dozens of wholesome and heartfelt songs throughout his more than 30-year career. Given the type of music he's known for, it came as a surprise to many when police released dashcam footage of Travis's arrest for driving under the influence 5 years earlier. State troopers found him in a car outside a church in Grayson County, Texas, with an open bottle of wine after receiving a call about an unclothed man lying in the road. He was naked and stunk of booze and had crashed the vehicle in a construction zone. Earlier that evening, Travis had allegedly entered a convenience store while naked and demanded cigarettes. An employee called the police, and he reportedly left when he realized he didn't have any money to pay for the cigarettes. When troopers took the county singer into custody, he became belligerent and threatened their lives. He was charged with a DUI and making a terroristic threat against a public servant. After coming to his senses and realizing that the arrest had been captured on camera, Travis sued to block it from being released to the public. 5 years later, in 2017, a judge ruled that the video didn't violate his privacy rights and allowed its release. Travis pleaded guilty to the DUI charge in 2013 and was sentenced to 2 years of probation. 6 months later, he suffered a massive stroke which left permanent damage and prevented him from fully returning to his singing career.
Would you rather spend a month in jail after being arrested in a case of mistaken identity, or avoid jail time but have your mugshot go viral online along with an embarrassing story after being arrested for something you didn't do? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.